So I received a question regarding running a race called the Spartan Ultra. For those that aren't familiar, it's a 50-kilometer race. There's 60 obstacles during it. These obstacles range from, kind of monkey bars on steroids to running up ramps to moving with weight, and I encourage anyone who's interested in it, take a look, just Google it, the Spartan Ultra. Very intensive and very formidable challenge for sure. So in getting that question, I wanted to break it down as briefly as I can. I'm not trying to make these videos too long, but bring it down to just the parameters of endurance. And this gentleman's specific question had to do a lot more with the run portion of the event. So in doing that, trying to make it as broad as an answer as I could, I did do up a Dropbox file. Anyone interested in such a race, I'd be happy to forward the link to you. But essentially, when you get something like this, taking an event that is endurance-based, but is more than just one single component. It's not a flat race on the track for 50 laps. It's a lot more dynamic than that. So I think the biggest thing to do, break down the event. And as you'll see, I broke it down into what I found is 6 components. And these 6 components aren't anything specific to this race or endurance, but they're almost more amplified because they make up such a component. So that's being your running, obviously, your strength or your weight training, your injury prevention, and your mental aspect, your recovery, and your nutrition. So without going too far into it, obviously the biggest one being this one is the running itself. 50 kilometers is it's longer than a marathon. It is the start of, and what they went for is the feel of an ultra marathon while still being an obstacle course. So, and with that, it's something like this, and for anyone's running who's looking to improve it, is breaking down what the run actually is. So in this event, breaking it down to hills, running after an obstacle, and running in steady state. So when you kind of get into your rhythm, but even more than that, knowing that there's 60 obstacles in 50 kilometers, your consistency of long-term running is actually going to be minimal by comparison. It's going to be a lot of shorter durations than into obstacles. So it offers the benefit of not having to run, 50 kilometers straight, but playing to what your strengths and weaknesses are. In this instance, having obstacles and running, well, if you know that you're more comfortable with your ability to do obstacles, whether it's upper body strength or whatever it is, then you can use the obstacles as more of a recovery stage. So you're more in your wheelhouse there, and then you work harder during the run, or vice versa, where if running is your strength, you can kind of find a rhythm that you can gain your heart rate, get your heart rate down during the run portion, and then go hard on the obstacles. So getting into training for running in more general, so anyone looking to increase their endurance with running, is one of the biggest components is making running more efficient. So if you look at it as a fixed amount of energy you have to expend during a run, you want to find the ways in which you can make that energy go the furthest, so the least amount of wasted energy. So in doing that, you want to make each stride as efficient as possible, so you're wasting the least amount of energy. And if you break that down into a few components, being your shoulders, your stride length, and your foot strike. And there's lots more on this. You go to YouTube, there's tons on running mechanics. I am not myself a running coach, but I've had some great advice over the years. And obviously with this, it took a lot of time to dig into more of it. And especially with shoulders, a big component with shoulders that people overlook in running is they are what actually provide your momentum and your balance, right? So by driving your left arm up and your right leg at the same time, as we know your limbs want to oppose, you are actually balancing your momentum to keep yourself in a smooth, linear running form. So in preparing to do especially a long distance run where you're going to be using your shoulders a lot in the obstacles, you really want to have a focus on your muscular endurance in your shoulders, as well as your range of motion, your mobility, and your overall strength of your shoulders is going to be paramount. Because when you're running, you want your arms to run along your body like this, as opposed to kind of like the skating method where you are going across like this, but you're causing your body to sway each time. So every time your body's swaying, you actually are wasting energy to keep it in line. And we're going to touch a little bit on that shortly regarding core, because core is as pivotal to this as anything. But moving on from your shoulders, getting into your stride length. So a lot of people, you have your natural stride length where you want to reside, but not knowing if it's the most efficient if you've never taken the time to work on it. And a way to work on that is to take some time to take some slow strides and play with it to what feels the most natural versus what is the most efficient. So you want your stride long enough that you're actually, every time you pick up your foot and reach it, because that's gonna be the most amount of energy in running, is that you're actually taking as much stride as you can, but not so long that you're actually pivoting your hips, kind of like you'd see in a sprint. Sprints are exhausting, but you're taking very long strides, very powerful strides. So finding somewhere in the middle for yourself that's not going to cause your hips to rotate too much, but you're going to get as much distance on each stride as you can. And then lastly, bringing that into your heel strike or your foot impact in general is, especially over long distances with changing terrain, if you were to have a tendency for your heel to strike first or strike sideways, then every time you do that, you're going to send a jolt through your ankles, through your knees, through your hips, and it's going to have a lot more impact going up through your spine as your body's accounting for this impact throughout. So, and a big emphasis got popular, especially in the kind of around 2010 there, really big emphasis on toe running, but not necessarily to the point where you have to actually be landing on the balls of your feet. But if your heels are just landing smoothly as you transition, then you're taking you out of that impact. And you kind of think about if your heel's coming in and hitting every time, you're actually slowing your momentum. But if you're able to roll with it, you're actually building on the momentum, so you're wasting the least amount of energy in your run. So to quickly talk on scheduling your running, and there's a lot of different theories on this, and it's going to be very person dependent. And I'm going to get on this later, talking about finding the most sustainable training program. But one of them recommended is to have easy run, moderate run, strength day, interval day, recovery, long run, recovery. Something along those lines, and it doesn't have to be specific like that, but you should try to hit all of those dynamics. And breaking those down to your easy run, especially with a distance like this, is something like a 5 to 10K. You run at about 70% of max. So if 100% is your full-on sprint, you're aiming around that 70% where you couldn't exactly hold a conversation while you run, but you're not gasping for air the whole time. And with that, your 5 to 10K, that's also going to be your pace run. So you're paying more attention to how long it is taking you to run each kilometer based on your varying distances. And it's something you should keep up throughout. And having a runner's journal is huge on that, because you can find what is your natural rhythm. So when it comes to race day, you can look each kilometer and be like, okay, that kilometer was too fast. So if I know I try to hold that pace by kilometer 20, I'm going to be exhausted and I'm going to have 30 more kilometers to go. So next, getting to a moderate, and based on your current running level and where you want to get to, that's anywhere from like your 10 to 20 kilometer, even 25 kilometer distance. And you want to, and because it's moderate, you're trying to work up that 75, 80% range where, you know, you're trying to keep that threshold where you don't get fatigued during the run, but you're trying to actively improve your pace time as well. Getting into intervals. So that's things like knowing that, and I talked about earlier, you're gonna have dynamics like hills, and you're gonna have all these different terrain. So intervals isn't just doing sprints. It can be your hills day, your stair day. Intervals, I like sprints where you're doing like 800-meter sprint, 2-minute rest, and doing that for 8 to 10 rounds. But there's also intervals within running. So if you were to do a kilometer at say 90%, you're going pretty full out, and then after that you follow it up with a kilometer at maybe 75%, and then a kilometer at 50% to recover, and you regain that. Well, you're actually doing an interval run at over a steady state distance. So you're working more on your recovery and changing your speeds to maintain. So that's especially useful in an event like this, where you're gonna initially start your first kilometer after an obstacle. You're already gonna be starting fatigued, but it's gonna feel like 90% even if you're only running at 75%. And using that first kilometer to regain so that your next kilometers, you can be at about a 75% and keeping the same pace as you go. And lastly, your long run day. So this is what each week you're looking to add a kilometer or two. Maybe some weeks you're just doing the same if the last week didn't feel good, but that's your kind of like your test day every week, where you're trying to actually put more kilometers on. Even in an event like this where you know you're not going to be running 50K straight, but if you go into it being able to run a 50K straight, well, then you're not as worried about the running component itself. Another option for doing something like this is having a monthly or bi-monthly test date where you have a run that is challenging and you're trying to actively improve your time. Lastly, touching on the recovery aspect, recovery is just something, it should not be a rest day as far as people think you do nothing. You want to promote recovery by improving blood flow to the affected areas, especially with running. It's going to be your legs. So getting out for a walk, a cycle, some yoga, some stretching, getting good nutrients, getting good fluid on those days to actually promote and actively try to recover. So an active recovery day. So some considerations on strength training, and a lot of people, I think when they initially take on a goal like a long distance run, they think that it's all about the running mechanics. And that it's something where people think, okay, if I'm going to strength train, I'm going to gain weight, I'm going to get slower. But there's a ratio of power output that comes with increased muscle mass relevant to speed and endurance. So you are trying to kind of walk the line there, but there are some certain things to make that more efficient when it comes to your training style with strength to actually get you the muscular endurance and sustainability aspects you're looking at. So relevant especially to this race in general, but in any endurance-based event. So some things you're going to want to use, so for this specifically, is trying to avoid machines. So if you know that your obstacles are some like stuff like sandbag carry, body weight movements, all these different things where weight isn't going to perform in a linear, smooth fashion, well, you want to train your body to be able to handle that. So things like kettlebells, D-balls, med balls, sandbags, awkward weight that you need to maneuver and find good movement patterns for is the best way to train for it. Next, getting into things like plyometrics. So that's your jumps, whether it's a box jump, a broads jump, skaters, things that are making your body react to impact, not only is going to help you on the obstacles, but it is going to get that explosive power when it's getting into maybe you're transitioning to a run, up a hill, or post obstacle, whatever it is, when you need to recruit more energy expenditure to achieve something, that is where your plyometrics are going to help develop that. Now, when you're getting into your actual lifts themselves for running, compound movements are going to be kind of your wheelhouse that you want to hit. And not only being for the strength component of it, but it's actually for the core engagement. So touched on earlier with core, the core strength in humans is actually what gives us the ability to run the way we do. Long distances in the upright position. And I mean, if you want to dig into that, there's tons going back on, the ability to use weapons to hunt. Like there's so many advantages we have with that. But one of the biggest components is that your core keeps your torso from basically being like a hula girl on the dash of a pickup. It's what keeps you aligned and keeps you from wasting energy trying to save balance. So if you find that you are trying to improve your run times, one of the biggest things is to actually improve your core stability. So this is different than doing stuff like curls or crunches, all the stuff that is the show muscles of the core, because knowing that the core wraps all the way around from your belly button to your spine and back, it is what keeps you stable in every direction and keeps your torso on top of your hips. So compound movements are one of the most effective and efficient way to train for that. So things like squats, deadlifts, cleans, where you are involving every part of the body to keep them in line and strong. So especially when you're dealing with endurance, you're not going to want to hit your 1 rep max on these lifts, but doing things, the 12 to 15 rep range or decrease rest recovery or using them in stuff like circuits is a great way to get your core strengthened and more reliable so that you're actually used to engaging your core under stress and under fatigue. Building off that, and I touched on it briefly with the circuit training, is probably one of the biggest components for building a muscular endurance and keeping your body working under fatigue. So whether it's HIIT, whether it's CrossFit, whether it's just doing utilizing supersets, whatever it is, it's increasing your time under tension, your time under workload, to your rest as much as you can, because knowing especially an event like a Spartan or any other long distance run, you're not relying on your rest times, you're relying on being able to recover while still working. And it's a big component you learn in circuit training, is not going balls to the wall the entire time and burning out when you have 3 rounds left to go. It's finding a speed in which you can work that you can complete the entire circuit as fast as possible. And briefly on that, looking at rest times, you want to try to minimize your amount of required rest by maximizing your ability to recover. So working on your breathing, working on your mind-muscle connection, all these things that let you know what's going on in your body so you can know how to best recover during an event. So during your obstacles, during your run, or even just out during your weekend stroll, whatever it is that your body is able to find its rhythm that it can work as much as possible without overworking and needing to recover. So that's your running, your strength. Quickly on the last few components, injury prevention is one of the biggest aspects going into anything that is a long distance run like this, because it's hard enough doing it when your body's healthy, but if you have susceptible to sore ankles or sore groins or shin splints, and you get that around kilometer 30, well, you're still gonna have to go 20 kilometers under an immense amount more pain. So not ignoring the little things in training, and definitely not skipping on your mobility, your warm up, your cool down, all these components that are gonna keep your body the machine it needs to be to endure the event. With that, moving into the mental component of it all, it's no mystery that something like this is going to be largely mental. After all, you're pushing your body through hours of continuous exertion. Even when things are going to get fatigued, you're going to get tired, you're going to get hungry. And a big thing with this is practice in your training. You're practicing what your mental component is going to be. So a big part of that is actually training tired. And I don't mean training fatigue, but training tired. So perhaps, and when I give the example of having a strength day and you're still going to do an interval day the next day, well, you're going a hard day of interval training after a day where you're going to focus on your legs because that's the area in which you're strengthening. So you're training it tired and you're not giving yourself that out because, oh, I'm tired, I'm sore, I don't really want to do this anymore. Those are the days that you're actually going to be working on the mental component that is going to take you through the last 30 kilometers on a race like this. So one of the tricks on that is having something to distract yourself during the run. It's a pretty monotonous aspect. If you're only thinking about how much you have left to do, you're going to make it 10 times worse on yourself. So this is where people use things like the happy place. But honestly, if you have a way in which you know you can just zone out or you can just focus on something else, and this is a big aspect where people use music or podcasts when they do events like this, something that takes their mind off what they're doing so their body can almost just go into autopilot. And that having that faith in that autopilot comes from actually putting the work during training. So touched on briefly on the recovery aspect earlier, but rest days aren't your do nothing days. So your recovery, if you can't recover, you can't train. If you can't train, you can't compete. That is the best way to give you emphasis on your recovery days. So lastly, and I know it's a big one with a lot, and I'm not going to get too much into it with nutrition in regard to this, but the biggest aspect, whether it's training for an event like this or increasing your run times or training, a job like the military where you're rucking a lot, nutrition is your fuel. It's your fuel at all times, but especially when you're training in a performance-based role, you can't perform if you don't have the energy. So looking at something like this, like a run, we're training for Spartan, your carbs are going to be your best friend for one, because that's where your energy source is coming from. But it's not the same mentality nutrition-wise as it is to weight loss. You're not trying to slim down. You may be trying to do some composition change, getting leaner, but your goal is not to have a body transformation during an event like this. It may happen as a result, but when you're looking at your training, you do not want to deprive your body of what it needs to do this task, but there is a component of being able to train while slightly undernourished. Because an event like this, you're not going to have the energy source the same way throughout. And I'm not 100% sure what the refuel is like on an event like this. But some good things to keep note on, especially on having that long run day each week, is keeping track of what you eat for the 48 hours prior to your long runs. Play with it a little bit and see what your body actually operates on best. If it's a higher carb meal for a few days prior, if it's a bit more fats to give you that long-term energy, whatever it is, actually playing with and paying attention to what it is, so that come race day, when you step out there, you're not worrying about, well, did I eat the best thing before this? Or am I going to have, digestion problems during this race? Am I going to run out of energy and hit a wall 2 kilometers in? Am I going to have cramps? These are things you don't want to worry about on race day, but making those mistakes in training is the time to make those mistakes. So in the last 2 points about sustainability and accountability, when building any program, the biggest thing is not to make it cramming the most amount of training into the shortest amount of time. It's about fitting as much training into a schedule that you can manage during that time. So what I mean by that is, sure, you can lay it all perfectly, but if every week come Wednesday, you're sloughing off the second half of the week because you're fatigued or it's too much, then it's not a sustainable training program. The best thing is to start low and add more as you go, rather than adding too much and having to taper back and recover each as you're moving forward. And with that, the last point about being accountable is that, and there's a lot of cliche sayings around it, if you're cheating, you're only cheating yourself. It's very, very true that if you have no way of accountability for not doing the work, then what's going to stop you from giving in on those days where training is hard? Because training is hard, it is work. And what is going to hold you true to that goal? So that comes in many different components, whether it's your visualization, whether it's a partner, whether it is a coach, whatever it is having something that holds you accountable. And the best thing to do is not just rely on outside sources. Have something internal to yourself that you know that is going to kick you in the ass and tell you to get out there because you've been slacking off on your long runs or whatever it is. Ultimately, with anything like this, with any new style of training, if it's your first time taking on any kind of event, trial and error is going to be the name of the game in some regards, because as much as there are phenomenal coaches out there at this, everybody has a different history of training and therefore a different makeup of their body, and everyone's going to react differently to new styles of training. So I know it's a little long-winded. It was definitely a loaded question to get for the first one of these. I do encourage everyone to ask questions, regardless of what it is. I don't care how new or advanced you are in training. Throw out some questions so I can mix up what these videos consist of and try to help everybody that needs some advice within their fitness. So I hope you guys found this helpful, and have a great day.